Greetings, fellow conquerors, this is darkfireslide, and for this top 10, I'll be going over the top 10 changes I would make to the base game of EU4. These primarily consist of balance changes, but also include quality of life improvements that could, in my opinion, make the game better. There are likely mods that fix some of these, but I'm making this list because I would like this to be a part of the core EU4 experience. Bear in mind that these are my personal picks, and it's perfectly okay to disagree. But, without further ado, let's make some changes. Number 10. Mercenaries. The carrion cry of the forums goes with this pick. There is almost always a thread requesting changes to Mercs, or even to completely remove them wholesale from the game. My opinion on mercenaries at present is that there are generally entirely too many of them for each country's national pool. How would Paradox go about fixing this? Mercenaries should instead be drawn from an international pool, with its own manpower, perhaps based on region. With this change, too much merc spamming from too many countries would result in that pool drying up, eventually leading to situations where a country might literally be unable to fight back. This would make manpower more important than it already is, but would have the great effect of making it so that large countries couldn't just forego a national army in favor of one entirely comprised of mercenaries, as they would run the risk of depleting the pool with too much warfare. Rebels also become more dangerous with this change, meaning they might actually break a country every now and then. Number 9. More control over revolutions and pretenders. For those who don't know, whenever you get a pretender rebel stack, you can check in the rebels page and see who would become the new leader of the country if the rebels were to succeed. In this respect, it is sometimes better to simply let a pretender take over the throne, especially if he's far better than the current heir, or if you're in a godforsaken 15-year regency. The revolution mechanic works in a similar way, except to become a revolutionary republic, you must let the revolutionaries capture your capital. These mechanics are cumbersome, and it's awkward simply allowing your army to watch as the rebels take over your country. What I propose is a way to support pretenders or revolutionaries, perhaps in a civil war type event that might do something as drastic as split your nation in half, or perhaps even more sections depending on how much land you have. Think of Rome, for example. I think this would make pretenders, civil wars, and a much better mechanic that adds meaningful choices to the game. Number 8. Information about your dynasty. Sometimes in a monarchy you end up with a 20-year-old king who somehow grows to the age of 50 without having a single son or daughter, and thus there is no heir to the throne despite your best attempts. What would be helpful is a more obvious UI display to see your dynasty, perhaps similar to Crusader Kings, where you could get more information on your dynasty as a whole, as well as the parts of your family tied to other dynasties, looking at you, von Habsburgs. It would make those long reigns with no heirs seem more reasonable, especially if, for example, we had those CK2-like traits that might explain why our rulers are apparently celibate. Number 7. Improving bad monarchs. There is perhaps nothing more frustrating than getting out of a regency into a 0-1-0 ruler who will manage to live a full, healthy life to the age of 80. While this certainly adds unexpected challenge to the game, the ability to make a terrible monarch slightly less terrible would help stop republics from being the dominant form of government, alongside the regency changes in rights of man, of course. Any monarch with fewer than 6 points, the bare minimum of what republics can get, could perhaps be improved through better advisors, investments of money, and monarch points, or perhaps through being successful in taking land or developing your existing provinces. There is an event where an heir can be improved in a regency council, but more ways to actually improve monarchs would be a greatly improved change since republics can virtually do it at will. Number 6. Bring back big game-changing buildings. Early in EU4's lifespan, there existed very powerful buildings that provided massive empire-wide bonuses, each for the cost of 1,000 ducats. A university building, for example, gave -5% to tech costs for the rest of the game. Similarly, a military academy gave +1 yearly army tradition and a leader without upkeep. A favorite for those with gold mines was a building that had yearly inflation reduction. I felt that the removal of these buildings took away certain strategies and hurt the late game of EU4 somewhat. Without certain idea groups, it's possible to be stuck around 20 army tradition or less, for example, in the late game, and while the current government rank system helps a little bit, the loss of these buildings made the late game of EU4 less interesting by forcing certain strategies. Number 5. The Merchant Republic Province Limit. This is a recent change that I felt really forces players to play in a certain way. Since Mare Nostrum, Merchant Republics now lose Republican tradition for every province they own over 20. In a game about expansion and conquest, this can be a problem when your neighbors continue to grow, but you stay at 20 provinces because you don't want to lose your government type. This is, in my humble opinion, quite ridiculous, and it goes hand in hand with my next pick on this list. Number 4. Playing tall. Since the release of the Common Sense DLC, there have been a number of debates on whether or not it is viable to play tall, meaning that you own fewer, more developed provinces rather than many less developed provinces. The problem with development is that it is still, in my opinion, far too expensive, even with the right ideas and otherwise, to help reduce the monarch point costs. It's usually always better to just take land from your enemies, since you grow and they shrink when you do so. To make playing tall a more viable tactic, the cost of it needs to be reduced to make it a more reasonable approach to playing the game, since this is something that Paradox really seems to be pushing, especially with the new planned Prussian government and rights of man. Number 3. Maritime and Naval ideas. I think it goes without saying that maritime and naval ideas are, for the most part, idea groups that, while not bad at what they're supposed to do, are certainly not great idea groups. I propose that to make these idea groups more appealing, that they be given certain small land bonuses as well in certain ideas. In Maritime, for example, the extra sailors idea could also add a small amount of land manpower as well, if only around 10 to 15% to ensure that it is still worse than a proper land-based idea, but that it is not a complete waste for nations who want to improve their naval power. With more appealing maritime and naval ideas, I think that naval-based nations like Britain and Japan will become much more appealing to play to their actual strengths, naval combat, instead of just taking land ideas like everyone else. Number 2. Fort maintenance and high-level sieges. This pick for me is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I don't really have a problem with the fort system itself, namely the abilities of forts to block movement, but I do have a very big problem with how expensive forts actually are compared to what they actually do. First of all, forts are a massive upfront investment, perhaps as well as they should be, since spamming forts would cause the game to break down, essentially. However, at times it is impossible to afford more than 1 or 2 modern forts even as a nation with a strong economy, simply because their maintenance is far too expensive for a nation to handle more than 1 or 2 of them, especially compared to other building options which can make you more money or provide other powerful effects. The other change I propose is that higher level forts be easier to besiege, as needing 40 to 50 artillery to siege even a single max level fort is simply too obscene. If fort maintenance were 75% of what it was now, as well as the amount of artillery needed to get a siege bonus, I feel like the fort mechanic would be much more manageable. For this top 10, we have 2 honorable mentions. First of all, I want to mention regencies, which are obviously a pain in the ass, and also westernization. And the reason that I'm not including these in the list is because in the next DLC, Rights of Man, regencies are getting a tweak due to the Queen mechanic, and westernization will cease to be a game mechanic. So, I wanted to mention these because they are a very hot topic, and I didn't want to leave them out of the list, but since they're getting changed, I didn't think it was fair to put them on the list, considering the DLC is coming out in half a month. And without further ado, let's move on to our final pick. Number 1. Scaling advisors. Something I find to be quite irritating is that when I'm paying an advisor 22 ducats a month for his services, he still only provides the same bonus as someone who costs less than a third of his price. What's with that? Shouldn't better advisors give better bonuses? While the Monarch points provided by better advisors are extremely helpful, the fact that they don't have increased effects makes them less appealing. While such better advisors would be helpful, they're still higher level and thus have a significant drain on the economy, and thus spamming level 3 advisors would still be an economically perilous decision. However, having that extra diplomatic reputation or unrest reduction could affect the game in major exciting ways, and I think that overall it would be a net positive to the EU4 experience. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give me a like, and leave a comment with your own ideas for changes to the game. If you want to see more top 10s, be sure to subscribe to see when I upload the next one. And don't forget to check out my other top 10s too. Until next time, Godspeed, and may luck be on your side.